Now, now, would you like to have your book report right now instead of after the break, right?
Also, sorry, no, you have to tell me. I don't mind. Maybe you want to use the first hour to work on something specific, and then I can present as you prefer.
Actually, what I prefer is that you start because I think that sometimes 1 hour to discuss a book is too little. But unfortunately, that's the time we have. I think at some point we need to diminish the number of book reports, probably to provide more depth to the analysis. So as we can have maybe 1 hour, chronological hour, to discuss a book, this book. I think you should start now so you can give us more time to reflect later on.
Okay, but don't worry, I'm gonna use only 1 hour, maybe less, because I'm only one person, so I don't have much to say. I'm gonna be brief. So I'm gonna start with an open question, as always. Um, okay, so my book is Lolita, as you maybe know, and I'd like to know if any of you has read the book or maybe the movie. Are you familiar with the story?
Me both. The movie.
Who is me? Javiera.
Javiera. Yes.
And can you tell me the difference between the book and the movie, or they are the same for you?
No, for me are very different. Well, there's two movies. The first one of Kubrick, that is quite similar to the story, but the remake on the 90s, I think, it's kind of different. Because in the book you have more details of the relationship they have, and you sympathize more with the with this. I don't remember the name of the man. You sympathize. Yes, you with the professor. You sympathize more with him, and in the story, it's not that much. I mean, you're always thinking that he's doing something wrong. You know.
Yes. Okay, so now I have a technical question. How can I share an audio? Or maybe if I play the audio, you can hear it?
You have to click on the box, but when you're going to share something, there's a square on the top left corner. It says something like incluir audio del sistema. That's what you need to check.
Okay. What about if I only play the audio? Maybe you can hear it. Okay, because I don't know. Are you watching the slides or not?
Yes.
Or, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna keep it simple, mejor. Better. I mean, okay, so this is the opening of the book. This is the first paragraph of the book. So I'm gonna play an audio, maybe you can hear it, so you can get the gist of what the book is about. This paragraph is important because the author, Nabokov, sets the tone of the novel right away. I mean, by reading only these few words, you have an idea of what the book is about, what the topic is about, and the tone of the novel in general. So I'm gonna play the audio and you can tell me if you can hear it or not.
We can't.
No?
Yes, I think we can't.
Okay, so I'm gonna read it for you. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul. Lolita, the tip of the tongue taking a trip of 3 steps down to the palate to tap. at 3 of the teeth. Lolita. She was low, plain low in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in one sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on dot line. But in my arms, she was always Lolita. So as you can guess, Lolita, she was a little girl. She was only 12 in the book. In the movie, she is, I believe, 15 or 16. But the book is about a pre-adolescent. She is very young. But I'm gonna start with Nabokov and some references. So he was born in Russia. He is Russian by birth, but later on in life he moved to America. Why? Because he was born in a wealthy family. I mean, for example, his family had like 50 servants in the household. So later on, the revolution in Russia exploded, and then the family had to move to Europe. And then he spent some years in France, some years in Germany, where he met his wife. And then, with the Second World War, he went to America with his wife. And then he took the American nationality. That's why I'm talking about him as an American novelist. Also because most of his books were written in English. So, for example, Lolita, he wrote this novel first in English, and later on he himself translated the book into Russian. And as a side note, he always said that he was sorry that the first language of Lolita was English, because in his opinion, the Russian language was much more rich, and he would have preferred to write this book in Russian as first language. But at that time, he was more American than Russian. But nowadays, he is considered both Russian and American novelist, also a poet and also a translator. And as an interesting information about him, he was also fond of butterflies. He was always like in escapades to the countryside, trying to capture butterflies and analyzing them. And also he was a chess expert. And one of his books, it's called La Defensa in Spanish, where he writes about a chess player. And his most important books are first Lolita, of course, then another important book for him was Pale Fire. Both are quite different. I've read both, but I prefer Lolita. Actually, Lolita is my favorite book by Nabokov. And as for his style of writing, he is very like poetic, because he was also a poet. And so if you read one of his books, the language that he uses is very rich. For example, Lolita, when I read it 2 years ago, I read it in English, and the language was kind of complex for me, because I had to look up the words. Like every 5 words, I had to look up one new word. The language was very complex and rich, but that is because of a reason that I'm going to explain later. In Pale Fire, for some experts in Nabokov, they say that Pale Fire is his most important work. Actually, if you ask some writers about Nabokov's work, they will recommend Pale Fire because of the style of writing in this book. That is, how can I say, it is like one book inside another one. So it's very interesting as a writing exercise. Historical context of the book. Lolita. It was published in 1955. It is kind of it is still a modern book. It fixed into that style of writing, but not completely. But still, you can see Lolita as a modern book. And as important information, it became like an instant classic. And if you if you watch the different, if you read the different list of the best book of the century or the best book ever written, you are gonna find Lolita. And why? Because I think there are two reasons why Lolita is so important for many people and why Lolita became the favorite book of many writers as well. Because one reason is, of course, the topic of the book that is very controversial because the author is tapping into a taboo topic, and that is love, not really love, obsession of a man for a little girl. This topic wasn't really covered openly by literature at that point. Of course, it has been always present in art, mainly in paintings, in mythology, and in old art, but in modern art, it was a taboo. But Nabokov was obsessed with this idea. And he actually wrote very many different short stories and poems about this idea of a affair between a young girl and an adult. And the other reason is, of course, the way in which the book is written, because you have to read the book to understand why it's so impressive. Because even though you are reading a very horrid story, you are like engrossed in the book. You can put it down. You have to finish the story when you start to read Lolita. And also the book consolidated Nabokov's reputation. And of course, he was always asked about Lolita because this was his masterpiece. So in different interviews, this is what he said about his book. First, no, I shall never regret Lolita. She was like the composition of a beautiful puzzle. Its composition and its solution at the same time, since one is a mirror view of the other, depending on the way you look. Of course, she completely eclipsed my other works, but I cannot grudge her this. There is a queer, tender charm about the mythical nymphet. In another interview, he said, Lolita is a special favorite of mine. It was my most difficult book. The book that treated of a theme which was so distant, so remote from my own emotional life, that it gave me a special pleasure to use my combinational talent to make it real. Now I would like to show you an interview that he gave about Lolita, but I can do it. Okay, can you see the YouTube channel or not?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you hear something?
No, we can't. You have maybe you have to like share with audio. It says somewhere, so we can hear. I think when you share, there is an option.
Let me see. Okay, I can do it. Maybe. Let me
Barbara,
try. Uh-huh.
look, when you click this part, compartir escritorio, there you have like squares of what you want to share, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and above that it says incluir el audio del sistema, right?
Can you hear now?
Yes, now we can.
Yes.
Okay. So again, actually, Nabokov was a polyglot. He spoke English as a first language, also Russian as a first language, and he learned French, and he learned German. The reason why is because, as I said before, he was son in a wealthy family, so he had a governess in his house, so he learned several different languages, and he is speaking in French.
Nabokov, c'est Lolita. C'est l'équation qu'on entend toujours. Nabokov, c'est Lolita. Est-ce que vous n'êtes pas un peu agacé à la fin par le succès de Lolita qui était si considérable que, bah, je sais pas, qu'on risque de penser que vous êtes le père d'une seule petite fille un peu perverse? Eh bien, Lolita n'est pas une jeune fille perverse. C'est une pauvre enfant que l'on débauche et dont les sens ne s'éveillent jamais sous les caresses de l'immonde monsieur Humbert, oui, à qui elle demande une fois, est-ce qu'on va toujours vivre comme ça en faisant toutes sortes de choses dégoûtantes dans des vies d'Humbert? Mais pour répondre à votre question, non, son succès ne m'agace pas. Je ne suis pas comme un Doyle qui, par snobisme ou simple bêtise, préférait être connu comme l'auteur d'une histoire d'Afrique qu'il croyait bien supérieure à son Sherlock Holmes. Et il est assez intéressant de se pencher, comme disent les journalistes, sur le problème de la dégradation inepte que le personnage de la nymphette que j'ai inventé en 55 a subi dans l'esprit du gros public. Non seulement la perversité de cette pauvre enfant a été grotesquement exagérée, mais son aspect physique, son âge, tout a été modifié par des illustrations dans des publications étrangères. Des filles de 20 ans ou davantage, de grandes dindes, des chasseurs de trottoirs, des modèles bon marché, que sais-je, ou des simples criminels aux longues jambes, sont baptisés nymphette ou Lolita dans des reportages de magazines italiens, français, allemands, etc. Et les couvertures des traductions turques et arabes atteignent le comble de l'ineptie. Vous auriez dû nous en apporter. Oui, c'est dommage. Ce sont des exemplaires très rares. Mais il représente une jeune femme au contour opulent, comme on disait dans le temps, et à la crinière blonde, imaginée par des nigauds qui n'ont jamais lu mon livre. En réalité, Lolita, je le répète, est une fillette de 12 ans, tandis que M. Humbert est un homme mûr. Et c'est l'abîme entre son âge et celui de la fillette qui produit le vide entre ce vide, ce vertige, la séduction, l'attrait d'un danger mortel. En second lieu, c'est l'imagination du triste satyre qui fait une créature magique de cette petite écolière américaine, aussi banale et normale dans son genre que le poète manqué Humbert est dans le sien. En dehors du regard maniaque de M. Humbert, il n'y a pas de nymphette. Lolita, la nymphette, n'existe qu'à travers la hantise qui détruit Humbert. Et voici un aspect essentiel d'un livre singulier qui a été faussé par une popularité factice. C'est vrai.
So what is most important about this interview is that he said that, first of all, he is not upset by the popularity of this novel. In fact, he was always very proud of Lolita as his most important work. And the second important point of the interview is when he is asked about the interpretation of Lolita given by the mass media, because he said that, of course, that was a problem, because even though he wanted to portray the idea of an infula, I'm gonna go back to that concept later, infula of this young girl, a 12-year-old girl, the mass media insisted on portraying Lolita as an adolescent, as a grown-up woman. And he was very upset by this idea because, of course, it destroys absolutely the main point of the book. That is this love, this impossible love between a 12-year-old girl and a grown-up man because of the age difference. Because Humbert was obsessed with the idea of an infula, of a mythical being that didn't exist. Actually, Lolita only existed in his imagination. Now I'm gonna talk about the plot of the book. The plot of the book. As you can see here in the slides, I chose this cover of the book because if you Google the book Lolita, you are gonna find, as Nabokov said, the image of a woman or of an adolescent, very seductive. And that is not the main idea of the book. So I like this one because you can see a child and a grown-up man together. And immediately you can see like something wrong with this image. So the main, oh no, I'm gonna talk about the plot, of course. Okay, so the story, maybe you are familiar because it's very similar to the movie, but the stories are presented differently. Meanwhile, the book is more deep because, of course, the writer had more time and space to talk about the characters. In the movie, instead, the story is more concise. And some important traits of the novel are left aside. So I'd recommend the novel instead of the movie. So the novel is notable for its controversial subject, as I said before. First of all, the protagonist is an unreliable narrator. This means that we are reading this story from the point of view of Humbert, who is a poet who lives in America. And then there he met this girl, Lolita, and he got obsessed with her. Humbert is a middle-aged literature professor, and he uses the nickname of Humbert. Actually, Humbert, in the first pages of the book, he assumes himself as a pedophile. Not with these words, but he talks for many pages about his obsession with the idea of a nymphet. Nymphet is a young girl between 7 and 12 years old. And actually, at some point, he says that when the nymphet becomes an adolescent, it is like something horrid in nature that shouldn't happen. So, and he tells some sexual stories with little girls, but he never got too far with these stories. It was always like a fantasy, an obsession, but he never did anything about it until he met Lolita. So Humbert is a foreigner, and he goes to America and lives in the house of a widow who has a daughter, Lolita, who is 12 years old, and very soon Lolita attracts the attention of Humbert. Charlotte, the mother of Lolita, falls in love for Humbert, and they get married. But Humbert wasn't really in love with Charlotte. Obviously, he got married to her because he wanted to get in touch with Lolita. He was already upset with her, and he didn't want to go away from that household. So he played along and he married Charlotte. But at some point Charlotte finds his secret diary, and she learns that Humbert was obsessed with his daughter. And at that moment, she got kind of crazy and she goes out of the house and she was killed by a car. At this point, this was like a very convenient for Humbert because Charlotte dies right away, and obviously because he was married to her, becomes the father of Lolita, kind of the father of Lolita, and because he was her closest relative. So he says to Lolita, okay, we are gonna go on a road trip so that you can forget about this awful event, and we're gonna go around America in my car. And they do so. And he takes Lolita and they go all around America in a car, and at that point he was completely lost in love for her, obsessed with her, and soon he started to abuse her. This is kind of difficult to explain, but yeah, that is what happens in the book. And at some point, he thinks, okay, I have to give Lolita a normal life. So he set in a different state to live together with her like a couple, but he tries to put her in a school so that they can live normal lives. But of course, Lolita was already corrupted by him. So when she was at this school, everybody around her could notice that something wrong was going on with Lolita. And some teachers went to talk to Humbert about this issue because they said to him, okay, there is something wrong with Lolita because she seems very aware of the world. She's not like other girls. So we want to find out what is going on with her, with her life. And at that point, Humbert freaks out and he says, no, nothing is wrong. We are good. We are well. And the next day, he takes Lolita out of the school and they set themselves on another road trip because, of course, he wanted to keep Lolita all for himself. He didn't want to share the nymphet with anybody because she was, as I said, 12 years old, so he had very little time to share with her because very soon she was gonna be a teenager, and he was terrified by this idea. The characters of the novel are four: Lolita, of course, then Humbert, then Charlotte, and then Claire. Lolita is this girl. She is very youthful, alive, seductive as well. Then we have Humbert. He is a foreigner, he is a poet, he is obsessed with Lolita, and he never realizes that what is he doing to this girl, never. And then we have Charlotte, who is the mother of Lolita, who dies very soon in the novel. And then we have Claire. that is like another lover that Lolita had at the end of the book. The setting of the novel is the United States. That one is Nabokov. The United States in general, because Humbert took Lolita on a road trip. So they spend most of the time inside the car and traveling around all the different states and cities. Why in a car? Because if you think about it, in a car, they are in a separate world. They are like living a fantasy. The tone of the novel. The tone is dark, is also sly, intellectual, and then the book alternates between romantic, erotic, but it's always dark. With dark, I mean because the topic of the book is unsettling, because you're reading about something wrong, but at the same time, you are attracted by the book. But what is going to happen? How this story is going to pan out. So you are reading about something bad, but at the same time, you are attracted by the story. And also, it is dark because even though Humbert is a pedophile, you feel kind of sympathy for him, and you get to the point of understanding his behavior. It is sly because Humbert is obsessed with Lolita, and everything he does it because he does it because he wants to get something out of Lolita, not because he cares about her. He wants her sexually only. It is intellectual because Humbert is a poet, and obviously he believes himself in another sphere. He thinks of himself very highly. And this idea of love between the nymphet and a grown-up man, in his mind, is acceptable, and he never criticizes himself for what is he doing, never. And the novel, as you might guess, sometimes it's romantic, sometimes it's erotic, but it's always very dark. The narrator point of view. The story is narrated by Humbert from his prison cell. These are a kind of a memoir from him. And the foreword in the book is important. Actually, when I read the book, I wasn't sure if it was like a real story or a novel, because it's kind of confusing. And actually, Nabokov uses this technique of the foreword in some other of his works. And this is important. Humbert never realizes the harm he is inflicting on Lolita, because he was abusing her, but he never reflects or thinks about it. Actually, in his mind, everything he did, it was good. He never judges himself. And the themes of the book: pedophile, eroticism, child abuse, moral issues, perversity, obsession, limiting with love. Okay, the first one is kind of obvious, pedophile, because in most legislation in the world, if you have intercourse with a person under the age of 14, that relationship is considered as a pedophile. Eroticism, because the book is very explicit in some points. Actually, that point surprised me because I wasn't expecting that kind of explicit images in the book. Child abuse, because in different areas, one, sexually abused, but also because he ruined Lolita's life, because he never gave her the possibility to educate herself, to develop herself as a woman. Never. He only wanted her to satisfy his desire. And moral issues because, as you may guess, some people may think that this type of relationships are okay, but for most of the population, they are wrong, that you have opinions about it. Perversity, obsession, limiting with love. Obsession, it is the main topic in my opinion, because Humbert, for some people, they say that Humbert wasn't in love with Lolita because Lolita, as Nabokov said in the interview, Lolita was more an idea for him, a fantasy. He never saw Lolita as a human being. He only saw her as like a mythical idea of the nymphet, but he never got to the point of knowing her completely. And he never cared about her either. Exile because Humbert was a foreigner, and homelessness and road narratives. Symbolism of the book. Okay, the motive of the book is this obsession between this man and Lolita, as I've talked about it. The metaphors, because Humbert was a poet, so all the language that he uses in the book is like a metaphor. And he's always, all the time, comparing himself with other artists, other writers, other important personalities that had this obsession with nymphets. And also the nymphet archetype. This is important, and Nabokov was kind of proud of this archetype that he created, because the nymphet means, as I said, it is a young girl between 6 years old and 12. A pre-adolescent is like a very seductive child that attracts men. In the book, Humbert talks about the nymphet all the time. That's why many critics said that Humbert wasn't in love with Lolita, that he was obsessed with the idea of the nymphet. So now we have some minutes for discussion. And the first question is, actually you can answer any of these questions. Was Humbert in love with Lolita? What would be your reaction if you see one of your students reading this book? This question is important because some people may say that this is a dirty book and you shouldn't read it, but maybe for other people you can say, okay, this is a classic and you have to get familiar with the story. But at what age? Is this a book for a teenager or for an adult, or for anybody who wants to read a novel? Another question is the life or personal preferences of an artist, if the life of personal preferences of an artist are controversial, should they be praised? And this question, because many writers and artists in general, they lead very controversial lives. Actually, Neruda as well, she was accused for rape and many other crimes, but he is still an important figure in our country. Same with Nabokov. He was criticized by this book, and many thought of him as a pedophile, but the book is still very important and praised. Another question, should this topic, pedophile, be banned for the arts? I mean, because in ancient art, you can see this topic everywhere, especially in the Greek art. because it was something like normal, the relationship between adult men and young people in general, men and women. But in nowadays, this topic is kind of a taboo. So should this topic be discussed in the art or not? And finally, what do you think is the difference between erotic literature and Lolita? What makes Lolita a masterpiece? Because this question, because if you compare, for example, Lolita with other erotic literature, you can see that Lolita is very sensual book. It is a very sensual book, but it has different elements as well that makes the book not only an erotic book, but also a masterpiece. So, what makes Lolita special in this aspect, in your opinion? So now you have the word, if you want to say something.
I would like to answer the first one.
Go ahead.
Okay. The thing is that there's a difference between erotic literature and Lolita. For example, I remember my grandma. She was always reading these Corintellao books and those types of literature, and this is quite different. I mean, Lolita is kind of an iconic figure. There's this plot which involves you the whole book. As you said, you start the book and you cannot finish it. Sometimes you're asking yourself, is this all right? Should I be reading this? But the way in which it is written, it's very cultivating, and also the references, as you say. Also, what else? What can make it different from my erotic literature?
The language? What
Yeah,
about
the language. Yes, as you said, he's always writing like poetry, and how he describes her. I mean, it's not erotic all the time. As you said, there's passion in this. There's discussions between them. Sometimes he hit her. She falls in love with this other man. He fights for her. It's quite a different plot from an erotic literature book.
Yeah, also what I liked about this book is that even though we have two different characters in this book, Humbert and Lolita, the author was able to portray these two different characters very differently.
Yes.
I mean, when you read Humbert, you can picture this man thinking that what he is doing is right, abusing Lolita and planning what can he do to subtract Lolita from the world. But when you read the part about Lolita, when she takes the word, you can see clearly that she's a young girl. I mean, the different actions that she undertakes, her opinions, how she behaves, everything you can see a girl in Lolita. So I love this difference because some authors, when you read their books, you see, okay, the story is good, but the characters are kind of plain, and you don't see subtleties between one character and the other. So the book is kind of blurry, the difference between one character and the other. But in this one, what I love the most about the book is that when you can figure one character apart from the other very clearly, and the personality, the descriptions that the author gives about Humbert and about Lolita, I think he made a very important work in the psychological traits that he impressed in one character and in the other. So I think that is one of the reasons why Lolita, it is not only an erotic book, but also a masterpiece, a classic.
Yes, indeed, it is deep. At the beginning, when he met her in the house with her mother. You may think that it's a erotic book, that this is going to be the story, but there's more, and the intentions of him and of her. I mean, sometimes she escapes, and that she's not good, as you mentioned. In the school, everyone knows that something wrong is happening. She's not acting like a proper young girl of 12 years old. It's
Yeah, because she is corrupted since when she got together with him, he started to mold her brain, her personality to his liking, because he had this idea of the nymphet, and Lolita had to fit in this idea of the nymphet. So he did everything he could to separate Lolita from the rest of the world. Actually, in the beginning of the novel, I remember Lolita wanted to go on a summer camp.
Yes.
And do you remember? And Humbert was terrified because he said, she's gonna be 2 months away from me, and in these 2 months, he may become an adolescent, and I don't want that. I want her to be an infant forever. So I have to stop Lolita from going to this summer camp, and I have to keep her with me. So Lolita was not a person for him. She was like
Nothing.
a surreal being.
Yeah.
So he never saw Lolita as a person itself. And as for the second question, in whether this topic should be banned from the arts or not, well, I'd like to comment about a different Latin American author, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, because when I was thinking about this question, I realized that most of his books, actually Cien años de soledad, Memorias de mis putas tristes, y creo que también Amor, de amor y de demonios, sí, creo, sí. Gabriel Garcia Marquez uses a teenager, and not only a teenager, a girl. In Cien años de soledad, the girl was 7 years old. And he talks about pedophile, but in a different way, because it's not very open about these topics, but he touches on these topics as well, and other artists also do it. So should be banned pedophile from the art or not? In my opinion, no, because everything depends on how you talk about these topics. And also, if you are an artist, you are free to talk about everything you like, in my opinion. So for me, in the art, any topics should be banned from being converted in a piece of art. For me, I don't know, maybe for you, you have a different idea. Okay, so if nobody is gonna say anything,
I think Daniela is raising her hand.
Yeah, can you hear me?
yes, but I don't see if you have a if you are leaving a comment in the chat. Sorry.
No, I just want to speak up. I personally, okay, first of all, I disagree with you. I respectfully disagree with you. I think that if we talk about pedophilia, what's the word in English? Sorry.
I don't know. I was making up the word.
Okay, if we talk about that specific topic, from an artistic perspective, I think we're normalizing that matter. So if we say that this is a 12-year-old girl and a man, an older man that is obsessed with this little girl, I think that's normalizing the act of, I don't know, obsession, pedophilia. Sorry if I'm using the word in in Spanish, but I don't think that's a matter that we need. I mean, that we pass and that we do not question. You know. So if you think that Lolita is a masterpiece because of the language used, the tone, the I don't know, the how the writer expresses himself. Okay, that's a perspective, but we can't. I mean, I personally can't, you know, see this book as a masterpiece because it's very controversial, and I cannot feel well reading that there is a 12-year-old that it's having sex with an older man, and this older man is like controlling the, I don't know, the life of this girl. It's sick from my point of view. I'm sorry, I don't want to be rude, but I don't feel comfortable with acknowledging this how can I say, acknowledging this literary work as a masterpiece, because I don't think it is. Regardless, it's rich, I don't know, language and other features, you know. That's my personal opinion, and I don't want to be rude, but that's what I think.
But Daniela, why do you apologize? I mean, this is an open discussion. You can have your own opinion. Actually, many people think the same way as you do, so don't feel bad about it, because this is like an open discussion. Some people hate the book because the same reasons as you said before, because the author is talking about pedophile, but in my opinion, just to add more controversy to the discussion, the author never praises pedophile, never. Actually, when you read the book, you realize how sick and how like corrupted Humber was. And you, as a reader, you can get to understand his behavior and understand his mindset. And that is the another important topic in the book, that you can empathize with Humbert at some degree, but as well you are reading about a very awful and dark topic, and you know that everything that is going on in the novel is wrong. And the author, deep down his mind, he knows it as well. So this book, this reason is why the book is very important, because even though the author is talking about pedophile, he doesn't raise the topic at a high level. He always talks about this idea of this situation and events, but not criticizing, but presenting them to you so that you are the judge in the novel. He never presents a criticism to the pedophile in one way or the other. So you are in charge of categorize this book according to your beliefs. Mauricio, do you want to say something?
Yes. Well, I just wanted to add another comment to what Daniela is saying, like answering if it should be banned, like the topic should be banned for the arts. I think that this leads us to like uh, the topic of how sexual desires maybe, or yeah, sexual desires, I would say, are interpreted by people or the media or anything, like the audience, because I think in this case the author, I mean, he definitely was um, portraying something that maybe related to his real life. But if we compare it to other artists at the time, for example, Sylvia Plath or Anne Sexton, who were poets mainly, also novelists, um, people view differently. Like, for example, I think that the majority of people didn't criticize this author because he was a man, so he has sexual fantasies with women. But if it is the other way around, I think that female poets or female artists were highly criticized for expressing their sexual desires and their sexuality, actually. So I think that is a difference. But coming back to the question, like, should it be banned? I don't think it should be banned, but I think it should be looked through a critical lens, let's say, or critical view. And you can actually use it to discuss many topics, such as like how people see or interpret like sexual desires from people, just as I was saying. So yeah, I kind of agree with Daniela. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah. No, I wanted to say as well that if we banned this topic from the arts, then we open another different discussion about what topics can become subject of art. So if we open that discussion about whether one topic should be accepted as a matter of art or not, everyone is going to have a different opinion about it. So in my opinion, you have to give freedom to artists to talk about whatever they want to talk. Everything depends on how you address the book or the art. And in my opinion, you shouldn't ban artists from doing anything. I mean, the only area of life where you should give total freedom to someone is art. Because in that area, you are working not only at a conscious level. I mean, when you talk about the art, painting, writing, and music, everything, you are you are handling subconscious areas of humanity in general. I mean, you are, as an artist, you are in charge of taking different aspects of reality, like in this case, pedophile. There is a topic that exists that many people is affected by this condition, and at different degrees. For some people, it's only a fantasy. For some people, it is an issue in their lives, but it exists. So artists are free to take these different topics, not only pedophile, also maybe cruelty, and everything you can came up. And as an artist, you are it is your duty to take these different issues because at a conscious level, nobody is going to want to talk about pedophile. And if you ask somebody directly, what do you think about pedophile? Obviously, that person already has a speech about pedophile, and you kind of know what the other person is going to say. But if you talk with an artist, that person, it is not at a conscious level, it's more subconscious. So that person is free to take different topics and mold them into a matter of art. So that's my reason why you shouldn't ban any topic from be addressed as a matter of art. Not only pedophile, everything, in my opinion. Diana, do you want to say something? Javiera?
Yeah, I think it was me. I agree with Daniela. I really like her opinion. I think this topic it's something that it's sick and it might bother you and it is not okay. But I also agree with Mauricio, sorry, with the issue that you should see it with a critical eye. And this is a human aspect that has been existing in our planet from Greek culture, as you mentioned, Barbara, and also you may find more information from the Roman Empire. They really enjoyed these parties in which everyone was with everyone, and there were children mostly, and they were always seen as a sexual object. And yes, arts should be a topic of any matter, and that's the point of art, to discuss everything that comes from the human beings, from psychopaths to pedophiles to love, and every topic. And if we think about nowadays issues, we should think about, for example, Hollywood. What has been happening with Hollywood and Henry Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein and everything that has been happening all over the years, and people maybe it's blind of this issue, but this happens. This is something, it's not normal, but it is happening, you know. And we do not know, or we know, and we do not address the topic, but it is here, you know.
Rocío?
Yes. Well, I just wanted to point out the fact that I think that because the question was if this type of or art should ban this type of topics, and if our students, for example, or young children should read this. My opinion is that this book is it deals with a very delicate topic, as could be some other topics like suicide, like psychological problems. And I think that if you put this type of problems in front of a child's eyes, I think it would be really hard for them to understand, and they can even get confused and feel troubled with these ideas. So I think that if we want to educate our children or our students, we should consider their age and their psychological maturity to expose them to certain topics. Otherwise, it could be bad for them to come to maybe read this book wrong and think that having a relationship with an adult is okay in some way. So I think we should be really cautious with this type of literature. And also, I think that I can only understand this book or think that it could be read in the way that it could portray the psychological problems and how wrong these pedophile situations are. So I can only think of this book as a teaching tool for how pedophiles are wrong and how this should not happen at all. So I think that that's the only way I can take this book, like a twisted, like an analysis of a twisted mind of a man who is obsessed and who has this really deep down problems and affects the life of this young lady. So that would be my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. No, actually, in my opinion, this book is not necessarily for a teenager. This is more for adults, of course, because of the topic. And as you said before, if you read this book under a wrong perspective, obviously it's going to affect your mentality and in a very bad way. So you need to have like an idea about the world, your own opinions, and you have to be able to analyze what you are reading by your own. I mean, of course, there are many different books that you can use in schools, but not. I wouldn't use Lolita for my students because the topic that it covers are not the most suitable for a teenager, let alone for a kid. But this book, I'm going to go again about this idea. It is a masterpiece. I mean, you have to read it to understand why this book is always categorized one as one of the most important books of the century. It is not only the plot, it is not only the topics that it covers, it's the way how the book was written. Not only because of the beauty of the language, but because even though the author taps into this topic, very controversial, he does it with a very interesting perspective, because he uses a pedophile as the main voice of the novel. And it is very interesting. And you may disagree with me and you may say, no, I would never empathize with a pedophile. But when you are reading the book, at some point you feel sorry for him. You feel compassion for what is going on with his life. Because the author was able to weave the different threads of the Humbert's personality, so that you can get into his skin and you can experience and live pedophile. I know this sounds very wrong, but you can experience all this situation by yourself, even though you are just reading a story. You are not part of the book, and maybe you don't have these tendencies, or maybe you do, I don't know. But when you are reading the book, you can empathize. I always say that word wrong. Empathize with Humbert and also with Lolita. And that gives you, and that is the beauty of literature, in my opinion, that you can read about different topics, different type of people, pedophiles, murderers, maybe violent people, sweet people, different type of people, and you can see the world through their eyes. And my opinion is that Nabokov did this in a very, very incredible way. It is a masterpiece, in my opinion, for the way he talks about this topic. Very controversial. The book is not about love, it's about obsession. How Humbert was obsessed with this idea and how he did everything to satisfy his desires. The book is not about how good and beautiful pedophile is, it's more about the mind of this type of people. Because even though we hate, most of us hate when we see this type of news on television. It is a very normal condition for many people. They don't talk about it, but it's very normal. So that is another beauty of literature, that you can understand and see the world not only from your point of view, but also from a different point, from a different corner. And Lolita gives you both the perspective of a child who is corrupted by Humbert's obsession, and the perspective of Humbert, who he thought he was in love with Lolita. And many pedophiles, they are gonna tell you as well that what they feel for kids is love. That they don't only feel passion or sexual desire, that what they feel is love. And Humbert, when you read this character, it is incredible, because at the beginning you have a strong opinion against pedophile. I'm not saying that you are going to change your mind, but you can empathize with him at a very deep level. But you have to read the book to understand what I mean. Because I know it is controversial, but you have to give it a chance, because if this book is very famous for many, and it is a reference for many writers, it is for a reason, not only because the book is controversial. So if we don't have, sorry.
I would like to add something, maybe to help our classmates to understand your point of view. There's a passage in the beginning of the book that explains why Humbert is sick, why he's a pedophile, and he has this experience in his youth, and he's marked by this. He fell in love with this girl during a summer, during a certain year in his youth. He was 12 years old, sorry, too, and he fell in love with this girl, and she died. She got, I think, la peste bubónica or something like that, and she dies. And he's completely obsessed with this girl, and this is the idea that sticks in his mind. And he goes to Bordeaux when he's older, sorry, and he tries to fall in love with adult woman, but he's always stick to the idea of the nymphos. So that is why I'm not saying that this is good and all of that. I mean, this is sick, but in this story itself, you empathize with him because he's sick. And there's this game with Lolita. I think at the beginning she seduces him. She looks for him. He hugs him, he plays with him under the table, and he's sick, so he got this obsession for her. She fell in love, and he can't stop this feeling because this is the nympho that he was looking for. Lolita has how to say, Lolita is different. She's not an ordinary girl. She's different, and he's cultivated by this, just that.
Yeah, also to complement your last point, yeah, Lolita was different because she was already corrupted, not by Humbert, but for previous experiences that she had in life. So Humbert took advantage of this situation. So you can compare Humbert with a normal person. Okay, a normal person, what we think of a normal person, would have taken Lolita and would have tried to solve her problems, would have tried to educate her to give her a normal life. But Humbert, instead of doing so, he took advantage of how Lolita was in terms of her mindset, because Lolita had some sexual experience before meeting Humbert, and of course, Humbert took advantage of this, and instead of helping her to go through this situation, he drowned her more, even more in her problems. So yeah, the book is very interesting because talks about many taboo topics, not only pedophile, but also, well, you have to read it. But be aware that the movie, it is not like the book. First of all, because in the novel, Lolita is like 15 or 16, so you immediately can see the difference between an adolescent and a pre-adolescent. So I recommend the book. It is not long, maybe a little more than 300 pages, and you can read it very quickly, because even though I read it some years ago and the vocabulary was difficult, I read some pages again for this book report, and no, the book wasn't that difficult as it was 2 years ago. So I think you can read it as well if you want, because it is a masterpiece, and you have to read it. It's very interesting for you as a person. It's going to help you to, I don't know, to appreciate literature under a different light. So now okay. Oh, it's very late. I'm gonna finish my book report and thank all of you for your opinions. Actually, this book is controversial, so if you had a different opinion from mine, it's totally acceptable. Okay, teacher, you have the word now.
Thank you, Barbara. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As I imagined, the topic that you raised here served as challenging and quite controversial topic for everyone to take part of a discussion. That's why I totally trusted you in terms of giving your book report and extending even more than an hour. And even I think we could continue with this topic. I think there's several ideas that were mentioned that in which we could go deeper. So we need to remember that Lolita is not the first novel that deals with this topic and turns it into a sort of a linguistic play, because it's very skillful in the use of words. As you mentioned, a translator, a polyglot, right? So he really knows how to use, puns and to use language in a quite master fashion. But Lolita captures something that is very interesting, because we need to remember that the way we perceive sex is historically constructed. Right? We need to remember that depending on the decade we're living, the rising that we got as children, they are all shaping the way we see sex, right? And what we accept to be correct or decent, right? And what we seem to judge as abnormal, okay? We need to remember that today we're living in a sort of a culture that is fighting against this rape culture and sexual assault culture. So we have many movements like the Me Too movement, right? Our perspective has changed, and now we tolerate or accept or we normalize some aspects of sex. If you remember, Oscar Wilde in the Victorian England was sent to jail when it was discovered that he was homosexual, right? And today, many groups support the gay movement, and it becomes a great, completely accepted way of living sex, which I'm saying has to do with the historical period in which we're living. And it's not like bringing Lolita into a classroom will produce a mental breakdown on students, but certainly we need to deal with several aspects, because I don't have statistics here, but whenever we address a topic that deals with trauma, rape, there might be someone in the audience who has already experienced some sort of trauma. So that is something that we need to remember, right? When we decide to use a particular literary work. I'm sorry, you were going to say?
No, actually, what you said, the last point, that if you are talking about rape or sexual abuse, this is very common, unfortunately. So I'm pretty sure that between us, more than one person was affected by this issue in her youth or his youth. So yeah, I understand that this topic may be controversial, and that if you hear about pedophile and if you hear somebody talking about this book in a lofty way, maybe you are gonna be touchy about it. But at some point you have to make a separation between, okay, this what happened to me, or this topic in general, it is awful and it is like a taboo and should be talked about, because you understand it is awful, but at the same time everything depends on how you address this issue. And I think that even though Nabokov was obsessed with this topic of the nymphet, because he wrote different stories about this as well, and I don't think that Lolita, it is a book that supports pedophile in any aspect. Quite the contrary, because you can understand Humbert's minds and you can understand why is he corrupted, but in any point of the novel or afterward, you empathize with the idea of pedophile. No, that is not the point of the book. The book is that opens a door to the mind of a pedophile, and you enter in Humbert's mind, and you can understand his behavior, but obviously the book doesn't support pedophile, because that would be a different story. Of course, this book was banned for a short period because some people didn't understand the message of the book, but later on it became very popular, and many writers, when they are asked about his favorite book, they recommend Lolita. for this same reason, because even though the topic is dark, the author writes this book in a very skillful way. It is incredible. I mean, while you are reading the book, you are hating Humbert, but at the same time, you feel compassion for him. And the same happens with Lolita herself. You hate her behavior because she's a child and she misbehaves a lot in the novel, but at the same time you feel sorry for her because she is suffering all these abuses and she is not aware of what is going on in her life. I mean, she's being abused, she's being subtracted of the world, she's not being educated, she's only being used as a sexual object, but she can't do anything about it. And finally, all of this infancy, all of this situation that she went in her infancy affects her life, because when he becomes a grown-up woman, obviously her life is not the normal life that you may imagine, because she didn't have a normal infancy. So yeah, I'm repeating the same idea again and again, but the topic, but the book, it's really good. I mean, you have to read it to understand why I am so fond of this book. It is really good.
Thank you, Barbara. Is there anyone who would like to share an opinion about those of you who haven't read the book, but still you might have an opinion about, for example, what is the role of art? Is it okay for us to open a door, as Barbara was saying, to the mind of someone who suffered from pedophilia? The point is, can we justify Mr. Humbert's behavior at some point while we're witnessing this corruption of a pre-adolescent? We need to understand that the author is not, as Barbara mentioned, is not supporting or defending this behavior in any way. And then it's up to us to define whether Humbert was insane, mentally challenged, or he was able to separate Lolita as the person, someone who, with a heart, with a soul, beginning life, and the object of art. Can we make this separation? And that's something that we need to consider. Maybe any one of you might have an opinion. You haven't read the book, but still you have a stand on this controversial issues.
Or maybe not about Daniela. Daniela has an opinion.
It's not that strongly connected with the question that teacher asked, but I strongly believe that we can, for instance, if we read an author who is a rapist, we cannot separate the person from the work. So in my opinion, I think that it's the same thing. I mean, we're reading a rapist in this specific case that I just mentioned. I'm not making connection with this book because I haven't read it, so I'm just giving like a new topic. And I think that even though the author can be like a brilliant person and super smart and like a great writer or a great singer or whatever part of the art he takes part, for me it's the same thing. I'm supporting a rapist if I read the book.
Yeah, I would like to clarify that even though Nabokov had this obsession with nymphets, he never was accused of anything related to this issue. I mean, it was only a
No, I'm not
fantasy.
talking about the book, and nor the author. I'm giving just a new perspective of something that, if we talk about art and an author, that it is actually a rapist or something like that, that I wouldn't read the work. I'm not talking about this author because I don't know him, you know.
Talking about, for example, Michael Jackson issue and how to separate the artist from his acts. His
Yeah, and Neruda and for
yes,
example, yeah.
like his awful acts. Yes,
Mhm.
I agree with you, Daniela, but it's kind of difficult. For example, I love Michael Jackson. He's like kind of my favorite artist in the world, and I cannot stop sometimes listening to his music. But then I remember this documentary of Living Neverland, and it's like, wow, this is so sick. Or for example, Kevin Spacey. Sometimes I love to watch American Beauty for the fifth time, but then I realized, wow, he's a psycho. He's a sick person. Or as Miguel was saying, think about Leon the Professional. What are your thoughts on that movie? Would you think about the relationship between them, or this sick emotion from Leon of falling in love with this young girl? I don't know.
Actually, when I watched the movie, I hated the movie because, as you said before, the relationship between Leon and Matilda. Because even though it wasn't explicit, it was obviously a lovers relationship, and I think the director of the movie didn't do a good work portraying this relationship, because in that movie, my opinion, the director is praising this type of relationship with between a young girl and a grown-up man. So here I can make a comparison between, okay, that movie is like idealizing this type of relationships, showing like the grown-up man as like a leading figure that's going to protect Matilda. But in the book, Lolita, going back to the book, it is a completely different story, because the Humber is all the time using Lolita, and you can see that situation. And you want to protect Lolita, but you can't because you are just a reader. And do you agree with what I'm saying?
Yes. Actually, in Leon the Professional, Luc Besson deleted some scenes. You might find it in internet where they talk, and he says to Matilda that he loves her, but this is like a different tone from the whole movie. It's a sexual tone. It's a love attraction that a man and a woman might have. You know.
Yeah. Actually, when I think about Leon and the Professional, I can understand Daniela's point of view, because maybe she has that reference as well. But yeah, I hate that movie because, no, I mean, all the idea of this relationship between Leon and Matilda, it is corrupted in a very different levels. And the director, I don't know if this was his intention or not, but okay, this is a different version of Lolita at a different scale. But no, I didn't like Leon the Professional at all. And actually, there are some books that I'm going to go back to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, because he uses in several of his books the idea of a teenager, not only a teenager, a girl, because en De Amor y de Otros Demonios, no estoy segura del nombre, creo que se llamaba así. The protagonist is 12 years old and she falls for a grown-up man. He's 30 years old as well, but this author, instead of talking about this relationship under like a judging light, he idealizes this relationship between this girl and this man. So as well, it is a different perspective, because in many of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's books, he uses even though he uses a girl sexually, um, I don't want to. Yeah, because Gabriel Garcia Marquez is very famous, and I don't want you to stop from reading his work. But yeah, he uses the girls sexually in many of his works, but you don't hear many people talking about it. It's like, okay, these type of relationships are in his books, but nobody talks about them openly, maybe because he's an important figure for Latin America. But for me, it affected me because I love his writing, but I don't like the tone that he uses when he talks about this type of relationship. For example, in Cien Años de Soledad, she's only 7 years old, like 7. In Memorias de mis putas tristes, she is like 14, and the man is like 90 years old, 90. And in the Amor y otros demonios, she's 12, and the man is 30. So no, I didn't like. That's why Lolita, it is different. It is just different.
Right.
I agree with you.
Go on, please.
I think related with the issue of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and now that I think about it, also in Crónicas de una Muerte Anunciada, she's very young, and she's like the hottest girl in the town, and everyone wants her, even old men wants her. I think this is also related with the context of Latin America. If you ask to your grandparents, they got married at 14 years old, 15 years old, or less sometimes. So maybe it is related with that, with the context and the history. I mean, in the of the year, yes, that.
Yeah, or maybe because Latin American critics, they want to overlook this issue because it is controversial, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez is the main literary figure in our continent. So if you want to like underline an author's career, you don't talk about the bad aspect of his life. Same with Neruda. He was very controversial, but it is our main reference in literary terms. So we don't talk about the bad aspects of his life. But that is an interesting topic. Like, can we separate the artist from his work or not? Because I remember some years ago, an author won the Nobel Prize. He is not very famous, so I'm not going to mention his name, but he supported the genocide in the Yugoslavic war. And many people around the world raised against this author, saying, no, he shouldn't be like compensated with the Nobel Prize because all of his speech is about hate and racism, and he's supporting a genocide man. So this issue was very controversial, but the people who gave the Nobel Prize, they said, okay, but we need to separate the artist from his work. Those two are, in my opinion, different topics, because if we start to judge an artist according to his life, then we open a different door about what is good and what is bad, what should be considered like a good career or a bad career, a good person or a bad person. And if we enter into that path, everything becomes very blurry because everyone is going to have a different opinion about what's wrong and what is right. So in my opinion, we should only focus on the author's work, the literary work in this case. And so even though, I don't know, Nabokov, even though the topic was like taboo, he led a very normal life. He was married for many years and he had a son, and he was like a normal, regular citizen of the world. So there's nothing like controversial about Nabokov. Same with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, that even though he talks about this type of relationships in his books, he led a very normal life. And also he was left-winged, so he had the support of the literary critics. Opposite to what happened with Mario Vargas Llosa, who was right-winged, I'm not sure. So many critics were against his work.
Interesting point. And then the historical perspective gives us, remember, the idea to judge something as accepted or not. And Nabokov provides several layers, right? As Barbara mentioned, he was a member of the European Russian elite who was quite well off. And so he has some experience in that sense with nobility. Then he moved as an immigrant, right? Fled from to the 1950s, United States. So he gives this sort of outsider's perspective on American life. And I think McCarthy was the president at the time. So he comes from Soviet Union, where censorship was quite common. So there were prescriptions to anything that was against the ideological form and content that was allowed by the political party. So censorship, it's quite dangerous, because if you have not read something, but you're still judging it, how can you judge something or assess a literary work if you haven't read it? I mean, you may not agree, right, with the topics covered and explored or themes, but to have an idea and clearly weigh a literary work and define if for you it's a classic or not, you need to read it, right? So that's something that we have to be careful whenever we fall into the temptation of censor literary works. And besides, we cannot just, I mean, Lolita is one of the main books written by Nabokov, but it's not the only one. So in order to get a feeling about the weight of this author as a writer, we need to read, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 works, right? I'm really glad that you brought up this book report, Barbara. Again, I think that your decision was the best. I'm not saying that The Catcher in the Rye is not so relevant, but you see, many of your classmates interacted with a very controversial topic. How do you feel about choosing this and not the other one?
Yes, I wanted to work with The Catcher on the Rye, but as I said before, the book is like old-fashioned nowadays, because the book was famous because it was controversial at that time, because it was published after the Second World War, and at that time, the American politicians wanted to create this ideal citizen, like following the rules, compromise with the country, and living the American dream and everything. But the main character of The Catcher in the Rye, they was a total mess. He was only a teenager, but he was very lost in life. So even though that one is a very a recurrent topic, not only in literature nowadays, but also in adolescents' minds. That topic wasn't covered at that period in history. So the Catcher in the Rye was the first one in this area. So it opened a door for the coming of age narrative. So that's the reason why the Catcher in the Rye was so important. But at this point, after like 70 years, we are more familiar with the idea of not doing what to do with our lives. So it is not something new to read about a character who is facing this type of challenges in his life. But at that point, it was like a shocking for American society because I don't remember his name, but the character was lovable because he was like 17 years old. He ran out of school. He wanted to experience life. He had a strong opinions about everything around him, about his family, about the school, about women, and he wanted to live an adventure, but he failed in everything he attempted to do. He even hired a prostitute, but when he was with her, he didn't know what to do. So it was very like lovable character. I fell in love with him because he was so sweet and kind and innocent as well, because it is what we see in adolescents everywhere. I mean, they have problems with their parents because they are just starting to developing their opinions about the world. So when you read this book, you can totally relate to The Catcher in the Rye because we all have gone through the same experience at some point. So this book, it is a must in American courses, American literature courses. And this one, instead of Lolita, this one I would choose to work in a school, because if you show this story, this character to a teenager, obviously more than one or maybe all of them are going to relate to him. And actually the book is very easy to read, and it's very short, maybe 250 pages, no more than that. And you can, even though the book is very old, you can totally relate to what was happening in the protagonist's life. So the book is very sweet, but it's not maybe the best option. It was not the best option for us because it is not very controversial nowadays, because now if you see an adolescent who is struggling with life, you can totally understand, and you are not gonna judge that person for being that way. You can say, okay, this is a normal period in your life, but you are going to surpass this period in a couple of years. But at that period, and I'm talking about the 50s, there was not a difference between like infancy and adult life. You were either a kid or an adult. So this blurry period between maybe 13 years old and 18 years old wasn't considered like adolescence. You were either a kid or an adult. But the character was obviously an adolescent, and he was lost. So that's why this book is so important.
It is indeed, and I would really appreciate if you could read this, The Catcher in the Rye, particularly because it's not a controversial topic as at the college level. So you can take a stand and decide whether you support or not the moral downfall of a character. But if you teach in high school, you can use the Catcher in the Rye because, as Barbara said, students can connect with the main character, and that's quite enriching if you see that someone is going through a process and how the character, after some turns and twists, can find an answer to the big question that was troubling him or her. I think it's a very good suggestion that you can take from this class. I mean, after discussing about Lolita, ending with a suggestion about the Catcher in the Rye is not like the best ending for this class. But if you consider selecting literature for teaching, it's a good decision, considering that you're not going only to expose your future students to vocabulary, right, and grammar, whatever, but you're also going to expose your students to topics that make them talk and characters that they can see an image or a mirror to their own lives or their own issues, right, or life questions. So the Catcher in the Rye, don't forget that.
And
Yep.
yeah, no, also, well, just to be honest with you all, my intention at the beginning of this book report was to motivate you to read Lolita, because it is my favorite book and I think it is worth reading. But I think I failed, but it's okay. I mean, you can have your own opinions about what books you want to read or not. But even though you don't want to read Lolita in a specific, I still am gonna insist on the importance of literature in our lives, because I don't know if you are familiar with Christian Varken. He is a Chilean writer, a poet. He is the host in the TV show La Belleza de Pensar. And
Yes.
now, okay, thank you, Javiera. He always talks about the importance of literature in our lives. I mean, why should we read literature? Why should we read books, poetry, and this type of material? Not only to entertain ourselves, not only because we have nothing to do, or not only to pass the time, but also to enrich our lives, because when you open a book, you are reading, you are seeing the world under a different light, through the eyes of a different person. Like in this one, Lolita, with this man, very bad and corrupted. But also you are seeing the perspective of the girl, of Lolita. She was very naive because she was being used and she wasn't aware of this, because her perspective of the world was very narrow at that time. So the main point that I want to make now to finish this book report is that even though we can disagree with the author or with the book or with the work in a specific, we have to open ourselves to understand and see the world under different perspectives. And the best way to put ourselves on different shoes is by reading. Maybe watching movies may help, but it's totally different because you are seeing the story under the director's perspective. But when you are reading the book, you are free to imagine, to judge, to lead your thoughts in different paths. So even though you don't realize at the moment when you are reading a book or reading poetry, but later on you are going to think about a situation that you read, or maybe a sentence that stuck with you, or maybe a character that you liked. And that only, you're gonna learn only that through literature. For me, at least, it is an important support in life. For some people, it is their religion. Maybe they when they have a problem, they they think about God. For other people, maybe different aspects. But for me, literature is like a big support in my life. So it has helped me. It has helped different people, and this is the main message that Christian Varken always gives in his program. Not only La Belleza de Pensar, he is always a host in a radio show. So you may want to hear him someday. So I think now it's time to finish.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for the suggestion. I think it was a very enriching book report, and you opened the door for class discussion. I think many of your classmates, even the ones who did not actively were actively engaged in the conversation, and I think they are still thinking about the questions that were raised. And for the matter, you mentioned about the different views on Lolita, and if you type Lolita in Google, you can see that many images are misleading. Many of the images refer to, I guess, 15, 17-year-old teenager, and they don't make a reference to this 12-year-old girl. So it might be misleading. Or if you want to be more specific, Lolita Nabokov, right? And then we need to be aware of this effect whenever we are reading a book. If we're reading a book and not, as you said, seeing the story through someone else's eyes. Okay, that was what I wanted to share. Thank you so much for your book report. Will I see you on Friday? Are you coming on Friday?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, Javiera, for your recommendation. Okay. And Daniela is reminding you about an assembly. Daniela, would you like to say it openly?
Yeah, we have an assembly now for our program. I mean, Belgian English has an assembly now. 10:30.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, guys, I'll see you on Friday, God willing. Thank you, Barbara, again. I really enjoyed the topic and the conversation. I will see you on Friday. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Professor.
Bye, Professor.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.